It's strange. For me, the bigger the crowd, the more comfortable probably.
Really?
It feels less vulnerable. And I know that sounds weird, but a smaller group of people, I feel very like exposed. Like I'm
I guess it's true.
right here with these people, and that and it's easier for me in a big room or something to kind of just see globs and I try to see individuals obviously,
Right.
but it just for whatever reason I can kind of power through. But like especially if a room has like a few other pastors in it or something, colleagues or peers,
Yeah.
then I'm like nervous the whole time. What are these guys thinking? And it's silly. But
Yeah.
speaking is the hardest part of ministry to me. It's the least
Yeah.
natural. I know some preachers that like if they could just preach and do nothing else, they would be so happy,
Yeah.
And I'm always like, I understand you called me to ministry, but are you sure about the preaching part? And so it's kind of a double edged sword or like a
Yeah.
bittersweet
Yeah.
thing. It's a blessing, but it's not. It's a grind for me. It's not my natural like the people part of that or the leadership stuff. That stuff's more natural, but
Yeah.
the preaching is a process for
Okay.
sure.
So I assume you went to like seminary or
No,
no?
sir.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay.
I went to the School of Hard Knocks.
Okay. Fair enough.
I applied to a ministry school. I was planning on going, and the summer right after I graduated high school, my home church pastor approached me and was like, "Hey, I want to hire you now and put you through some like correspondence,
Okay.
Bible stuff." And that sounded like a great option without student loans. And so I took that opportunity. Well, he left not too long after that.
Yeah.
And so, we went through a transition. And so, yeah, so I mean, I have my credentials through our denomination. I've taken
Right.
classes through them and stuff, but I am not formally trained in the least. I don't have a college credit to my name. I just
Okay.
have a lot of experience. So,
Gotcha. Well,
yeah.
hey, I'm definitely not one who feels like as a minister like you need a degree. I always kind of, I don't know. I don't want to say battled with it because it's not that serious, but definitely, there are probably ministers who are really awesome who certainly have no degree or credentials, right?
Yeah.
And some that like, maybe that wasn't their best career path that, had the degree or credentials. So I
Sure.
certainly wouldn't
Yeah,
judge you for that.
education is great. Like I often feel like I wish I had more education. And I'm envious of some guys that do. But then some of those guys have really great educations. And I've got 10 more years experience and we're the same age just because
Right.
I started at 18. And so I've been in full-time ministry since I was 21, I think.
Okay.
So yeah, like I mean, I'm 38. Most 38-year-olds probably haven't been full-time at a church for 17 years already or whatever. And so that's kind of cool. So it's kind of a little bit of, give and take there. I
Yeah,
wish I had
yeah.
more education, but I'm grateful for the experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like in the normal career sector business world. It's like work straight out of high school versus like go to school, and it's like kind of that
Yeah.
whole debate. And
Yeah, some guys make a great living with a trade or
Right.
whatever. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, yeah. So you said you've been a full time pastor for how long did you say?
So yeah, 17, 18 years, something
Okay,
like that. Yeah.
and now you're at Bluff First. How long have you been there?
Yeah, well, so full time, that's the only place I've ever been. So I was on staff at my home church at 18 years old, which was in Elsinore.
Okay.
Was where I'm from, and I'm from the suburbs of Elsinore.
Right.
Halfway between Elsinore and Van Buren.
Yeah.
But Bluff First is actually my wife's home church.
Okay.
She's been there since she was like 12 years old or something, and so. Like I said, the pastor that hired me went through a transition. We got a different pastor. That poor guy inherited me, and probably really needed to upgrade. And so,
Yeah.
eventually went through a transition where I started attending Bluff First.
Okay.
Volunteering for the youth pastor. Was kind of at a weird transition where it's like I felt called to ministry, but I didn't go to school, and then I
Right.
lost this. I'm not on staff at this church anymore, and so. Started helping in youth. I was working at Hibbett Sports selling shoes, and
Okay.
the youth pastor who was full time. Well, he moved away, and Bluff First hired me to be his replacement.
Gotcha.
And so, January 1st of 2008, I became the youth pastor, and I've been on staff ever since. So I did youth for about 8 or 9 years, and then
Okay.
I've been the lead pastor now for 8 or 9 years. So I think summer will be 9 years. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
Long time.
Yeah, sounds like it. And, it's funny. I feel like I see that a lot, where a lot of pastors will go from like the youth pastor to the lead pastor.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's interesting. That was like never my ambition.
Right.
I was adamantly against ever being a lead pastor. It sounded like so much responsibility and things I didn't want to do. I'm like, I don't want to run board meetings or make decisions about air conditioners.
Right.
Or,
Yeah.
But it just kind of happened. My pastor left, and we got an interim, and then they asked me to be the interim, and my heart changed, and yeah, didn't see it coming. I thought I'd do youth for life,
Right.
In some way, but it's been a joy.
Well, that's awesome, man. Yeah, I mean, I will say, I think most people probably know, but it definitely seems like Bluff First is kind of, I don't want to say blown up, like you guys weren't there before, but it does seem like the more and more I talk to people, it's like, yeah, we go to Bluff First, and so, and I know for any church, kind of the growth and trajectory can be attributed to a lot of things, but when you look back over the past, couple of years, which I think is when you guys have probably seen the most, I would say boom, right? Is in the last couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, we've been growing for 8 or 9 years straight, but we've definitely seen like a surge over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think there's any like rhyme or reason for that? Or do you think, like what's kind of your thoughts there?
Yeah. I get that question.
Yeah.
Sometimes, it's interesting. So in 2015, I was a youth pastor. Our church had gone through some difficulty, nothing bad, no drama, just some struggles. And so that year we averaged like 52 in attendance, I think.
Okay.
So, there wasn't much to go but up. And
right.
so, we started worrying about the culture and trying to reach people, and we saw some growth. And then there's kind of this dividing line, right? Like when COVID happened.
Yeah.
And I think since then, most churches are growing or declining.
Right.
It doesn't seem like there's like the plateaued thing. Like 2020 kind of, it closed churches, it planted churches, it changed, merged, all kinds of stuff. And so when 2020 hit, we were probably up to a couple hundred people, sneaking up on 200 people. But that was a time that we were able to make a lot of changes. Church closed down for a while, a couple months, and we just kind of decided, this is the time.
Yeah.
We work here still. This is our job, and we can't see anybody, can't do anything. So this is the time to make the changes we've been wanting to make, and so I think that's part of it, right? Just our church changed in 2020, but then since then has grown a lot, and I think there's a few things at play. Like I said, most churches I think are growing or declining. And so I know there's a lot of churches, at least in Poplar Bluff, I could think of 4 or 5 churches that are really, really growing right now, which is awesome to see. For us, I would, after all the answers of, God and,
right.
Jesus builds his church and God brings increase and all of that, obvious, at least obvious to
us. Yeah.
To us. Yeah. At least obvious to believers. Like we give God all the credit. But I do think, culture and feel, 2020 also seems like kind of to me a dividing line where everything got worse in a lot of ways. Customer service got worse, prices got worse, everybody's angry, and so a lot of places you used to go, now you have a bad experience, and I think because of that, right, like light shines brightest in darkness, and so when you go somewhere and it feels good, when you go somewhere and people are happy to see you, when you go somewhere and you don't feel judged, you feel safe. I just think that stands in greater contrast maybe than it used to. And it's magnetic, right? It's like the difference, you go to some fast food place and they don't even look at you. They don't even, whatever. Right. And then you go to Chick-fil-A and you're like, oh, okay. Chicken's all right. Let's be real. It's all right. But the quality, the customer service, so for us, I think if Bluff First is probably known for anything, it's just like warmth and friendliness. And that's our people, I mean, we might have tried to do that early, but that's not us at this point. That's our congregation. And so I had a pastor buddy visit a couple weekends ago, and he said, man, TJ, like before I sat down, 5 different people greeted me and my son, like said hi or welcome or something. Parking lot, lobby, and so to me, that would be what I think.
Oh,
It's just
yeah.
that the way that people feel when they come, they feel safe. And when people feel safe somewhere and they feel excited, then they bring other people, And then to be real honest, I get this question too. Over the last 2 years, 4 or 5 churches in Poplar Bluff have gone through major transitions.
Yeah.
Pastors leaving, different things like that. And I think anytime that happens in a small town, you're going to see a little bit of a shuffling.
Right.
We've been on the other end of that where something happens, a church is growing and we're losing people,
Yeah.
And so I don't doubt that some of that's happened in all the churches in Poplar Bluff. There's people coming and going, but we're excited about a lot of our growth has been new converts,
Yeah.
people that are new to faith.
Yeah.
A lot of people getting baptized and meeting Jesus, and so we're real excited about that. I've been doing the annual report, right now, and looking at numbers and looking at decisions for Christ and baptisms and kids, and it's just a fun thing to be a part of right now. So
Yeah.
it was a long answer.
No, that's a great
but
answer.
Culture, I think, is the big. That, if I could sum it up, I'd say just the culture.
Yeah, I definitely want to shuffle back to the new believer comment you make, but I think culture is so funny because like I look at like a church culture as kind of like a business brand,
Yeah.
and I think you're right. I think your culture is everything, but, because when I look at a church from like, what am I trying to say? When I look at church from a transactional point of view, which it's not, but to somebody who's not saved, who
Right, it's a product of some kind, like it's a service.
yeah.
It's
if you've got somebody brand new to even wanting to go to church, in a way it's a product, right?
Yeah.
And so
What
it's
do they
like,
got for my kids? What's the music
Right.
like? What's the preaching like?
yeah. And some of that stuff's subjective, some of it's quote unquote not important, but some of it very much is. And so I think when you say culture, and I think about how a church comes off to like a new person, I 100% think that if somebody comes into your church for the first time, the first experience they have, and I would say even maybe the first like 15 minutes, probably shapes their entire view of your church. Danielle and I have, we visited churches before, when we've either moved or, been in between or whatever, where we visited for the first time. And it's like, I know that they probably don't recognize us, and to not be greeted, again, it may seem petty, but in a lot of ways that's like, that's what church is for, when
you're looking for community.
Yeah, you're looking for
sure.
community, because when you look at the early church, right? They did it in basements and people's houses, and it was small groups is really what church, I feel like, is probably really meant for. Like, what we have today is great, but it's the community, it's the connection.
It's
and
both,
so,
right? They met in the temple and house to
Right.
house, and and I agree with you. I think that feel. I can't remember who the quote is attributed to, but somebody said, people always forget what you say, but they don't forget how you made them feel.
Right.
And I think that's so true. We visit churches. I don't know that I could always come back and tell you what the sermon was about, but I can remember how I felt there.
Yeah.
And I do think that like teaching is an important part. I definitely wouldn't say, oh, we're growing because of the preaching when
Right.
I'm one of the main preachers, but I do think like that is part of it. Like the culture of the way that people treat each other is formed by the way that you teach the word and the things that you say. Here's what we value. Here's what we don't value. Here's the things that we're not going to give up or settle on, but here's the things we're going to overlook. And I think that is driven from, pulpits and stuff. And so I would say to a pastor, you might be a preacher and not feel like the friendliest person or whatever. You don't have to be like a social butterfly for your church to be warm. If you will value people and kind of strike down some of the silly stuff that can come up in churches, preferences and legalism and different things, you can navigate some of that from the pulpit and form the culture, from the teaching. But yeah, it's a big deal. I think how you feel, make people, people have enough barriers, right, to the Bible or to serving God. And so take down as many of those as we can, let people see Jesus, and he usually does the rest. So.
Yeah. I read, and I'm sure you're more than well aware of probably what I'm about to say, but, you read about statistics about people not going to church and numbers basically constantly dropping, it seems like. And I think there is probably in most churches a lack of what you were talking about earlier, like new believers. So when you look at those kind of stats or those kind of numbers, what's like a priority from your point of view, or even your church's point of view, of how to find new believers and how to, to get them, not necessarily get them to church, but, to bring them to Christ and connect them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I kind of said this, but I think that like the place you're asking them to come to has to be safe. Right. So obviously you can't dictate what every single person does. I see some people be like, well, come to Bluff First, you won't be judged. And I'm like, well, hey, you're not going to be judged by me.
Right.
You're not going to be judged, but I can't promise that,
Yeah.
I don't know what the person you sit next to is going to say. That who knows?
Right.
But it has to be safe for the most part, right? You can't control every person, but by and large, kind of what's acceptable, what's going to be frowned upon. I mean, there are churches that, if we just showed up dressed like we are, we'd look like slobs,
right.
Or whatever. And so, all of that is a factor. Does it feel safe? Am I represented here? Are there people my age? Are there people in my social class? Is it okay if I'm a mess? Is it okay if my kids are a mess? Like, it's got to be safe. And then I think, making the main thing with like teaching the scriptures, helping people open the word themselves, not just being impressed by like shiny preaching, but being practical, making the gospel the most important thing. And then I think you model and celebrate the things that you want to see repeated, right? So I feel like the culture of Bluff First really came from my mom's house. So we grew up totally unchurched. My family didn't go to church on Easter. But my mom and dad were very hospitable. And I can't remember a Thanksgiving. My dad's a truck driver. I can't remember a Thanksgiving where it was just our family at the table. There was always some like random trucker that was too far from home,
That's cool.
So, you're having Thanksgiving and like sitting next to a guy named Mudflap, But I mean, Christmas, Thanksgiving, there's always like, oh man, this girl's in a domestic situation and she needs somewhere to be and she's doing Christmas with us, or my friends would get an Easter basket at my house because they were staying that week, and so there was just always room at the table, or another table shoved in the living room. And so I can remember when I met Jesus as a teenager thinking like, man, I wish I could bring my friends here, but I didn't feel real safe doing that. And so I always kind of thought, I want to be a part of a church that feels like my mom's house, where everybody really is welcome. Like, doesn't matter what situation is going on, there's just a seat for you at the table. And so tried to model that, tried to, in the early days, tell stories about having people over to their house, and, finding ways to have relationships with people. I have a silly little, I'm a Chicago Bears fan. And so I got a Facebook group, and every once in a while these Bears fans get together and watch football. And I'm not their pastor. I'm just a Bears fan there, but I want to love them and want to, be around them. And so I try to tell stories about being with people. And so I think you model that, you tell those stories, you're reaching your own friends, you're out in the community, and it can be easy to fall into like a little church bubble, but try to find a way to be a regular at a restaurant or a diner or a coffee shop and get to know people, reach people. And then what you do, what you model, and what you celebrate, those things get repeated, right? And so then you tell another story. Oh man, Matt brought their friend, and I just think that stuff is kind of contagious. When it's what's happening, it's what everybody does. And so it's been cool. We're seeing people bring in their whole families, and
it's awesome.
Bluff First is kind of known as a young church, but we're seeing people bring mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, and whole family sitting together, which has been really cool. I'm long-winded. I'm sorry.
No, man,
I love it. Put a preacher on a podcast.
I love it, man.
This could be 6 hours long.
Yeah, no, it's great because, I think a lot of what you're saying is so applicable, again, to churches, to businesses, to really anything, of just kind of how community and how those personal connections matter so much more a lot of times than, anything else we do, right?
Yes.
Like, I imagine your church would probably still be doing pretty good if you had even the worst music ever and you were the worst preacher ever, you guys would probably still be doing pretty solid if you have that community and those connections.
Sure.
Would be my guess.
We're in the people business, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, we say that all the time. Like, look, we love music. We love, all these different things that we do. We're hoping to have a better building. We're hoping to, all of that. But bottom line, like, we're in a people business.
Right.
And that's what matters is people. And so I think if you value people, you care about them, you show them that, you're generous. It's surprising. A lot of people think like, and churches can buy this too, when we have more, we'll be generous.
Yeah.
And it's like, you'd have more if you would just be generous now. So give it away, celebrate, spend a little money on people, buy the name brand soda, whatever.
Exactly.
Give away ice cream. And you'd be surprised, like when you are generous, it disarms people. And so then they're generous, you know? And so, I think that the preaching's important, the music's important, all of it's important. But bottom line, people might come for that stuff. They're out the door in 6 months if they don't have relationships, if they're not needed and known. The best preaching, the best kids ministry, none of that stuff's going to keep somebody plugged in long term. And so that's been challenging to scale, pastoral care and small groups and all those types of things. That's a challenge we have ahead of us is like, as we grow and get bigger, how do we keep getting smaller and keep making sure people getting, connected and tied in. And I dropped the ball on people and I'm like, man, we got to be a church because if you're counting on me to make it to the birthday party or we're just gonna have to all do this together. So
you can only be so many places at one time, right?
Yeah. I got 3 little ones, and so they keep me busy. But yeah, I think the church that cares for itself, cares for each other, that's always going to be attractive. Yeah. And that's really, I mean, the Book of Acts on. That's what we see is like a group of people that loves each other the way that Jesus loves them. Yeah. No matter what the world is doing, is always going to be magnetic to people. And so, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great, man.
This episode of the Locally Made, Locally Owned podcast is brought to you by Ozark Legacy Insurance Partners. Do you or somebody you know have insurance? Well, perfect. This is for you. The truth is about talking about insurance is that nobody wants to talk about it until they need it, of course. And when that time comes, you want someone who knows what they're doing. That's where Ozark Legacy Insurance Partners comes in. With over 50 years of experience in the industry, they've been helping folks all across Southeast Missouri get the coverage they need. Home, auto, commercial, Medicare, life and health, group health, you name it, they can do it. And with locations in Perryville and in Poplar Bluff, they're always close by when you need them. So what sets them apart? They're local. They actually care about the people they serve, and they're not just selling policies. Whether you're looking for better rates, need coverage for a new business, or just want to make sure your family's protected, Ozark Legacy Insurance Partners will walk you through your options and find the right fit without pushing coverage you don't need. So don't wait until it's too late. Get the right coverage today. Visit ozarklip.com to learn more and to get in touch. Ozark Legacy Insurance Partners, because protecting what matters shouldn't be complicated.
Yeah, no, that's just a lot of wisdom right there. So I mean, I think that's great. I do want to shift gears a little bit, just because, the kind of world I'm in is, social media marketing, that kind of stuff. And I've noticed you guys. I didn't look this past week, but you guys seem to be jumping on some of that bandwagon a little bit of doing a little more TikTok and stuff like that, which who knows if it's getting banned or not. But I'm curious from your point of view, if any effect at all, have you had any effect on the church from kind of putting more time and effort into that? Or have you seen, like, I guess an example might be like if you had a person who didn't know you guys existed being like, oh, I saw you on TikTok, you popped up on my feed the other. Have you had any anything about that?
I'm always surprised at how people find us. You know, you just never know how things are going to go. We don't invest a whole lot of resources into any kind of marketing, right, but we do have a pretty steady social media presence. Yeah. And shout out to my wife. She runs all of our socials. Awesome. And does a great job. And it's kind of funny, because we've had 3 or 4 different people over the years run social media for us, including myself. And they've always been like primarily creatives, right? Which means we make really cool looking stuff, But sometimes, I don't know, maybe not you, but sometimes myself as a creative type, the discipline and the consistency, the quality might be there, but we haven't posted in 2 weeks, or whatever. And so my wife, not that she's not creative, she is creative, but she's more so like type A, organized, detailed, checklist. Like she's not going to sleep if it's not done.
Yeah.
And so we put social media on her plate just temporarily. Like, how will that go? We need somebody to do it. And we had a guy that was doing it that was moving away. And she took it on, and it is amazing what consistency does.
Right.
And then she's getting better, right? She's learning and trying different stuff, and she's done an incredible job. We hear a lot of stuff about, some of the silly stuff that she puts out there, like for fun. And just the information, the helpful stuff, what to expect when you visit. So I think it definitely has had an impact. We do have people sometimes that come exclusively through something like that. Usually that's not the case. It's usually more like awareness, right? So we've been seeing you, and then we saw in a couple of posts some people we recognize, and we've been thinking about getting back in church. And so we've been seeing the posts, and we decided to visit here. It's not usually a totally blind visit, and then I think like when people do get invited, they're probably gonna creep you first, check it out first, and we try to just represent who we are. Some churches try to be real impressive on social media, and be something they're not, and it looks like one thing, you show up and that's not what it is. And we don't take ourselves too seriously, and so we don't take our social media too seriously either. We take it seriously in that we do it, but we try to be playful, try to be fun, posting videos of our volunteers mic'd up or, whatever, just so people can see like what it's going to feel like when you're actually there. And so, I think it's been a big deal. It's interesting trying to navigate which channels and which platforms to be on. And do you do Instagram? Do you do TikTok? Do you do, I got people asking me, why aren't we on YouTube? I'm like, we'll get there eventually. But I think that's where people are. Yeah. If we're in the people business, whatever you feel about social media, and if you've got the gospel and you want people to hear it, put yourself out there. So, and there's so many tools now. You don't have to be a graphic designer or an expert to put some decent stuff out there. Get a camera, get an iPhone, take some pictures of your people and put it out there, So, but I think it's been a part for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I will say I can attest to the creative versus like the A-type stuff. I'm very much more of a creative. Like I get really psyched about stuff, and I'll do it for like 2 weeks, and then
you're on to the next exciting thing.
And so, that's something I've had to fight hard. Doing the kind of stuff I'm doing now of like, I was having a long talk with Danielle. I've recently started posting stuff to like my business page like consistently, and I'd had a talk with her like a couple weeks ago, and I was like, I can't do this kind of work and not do stuff for myself too. But my problem has always been, I want it to be like amazing and stuff. And so I have it now to where like once a month, like the first 2 days in the month, like those are my days to like film anything, make anything, do anything. And like for me, and if I can't get it done, like then I have to wait again until next month. Yeah. And I've noticed putting stuff like on your calendar seems to make that easier, but also having a deadline.
We need a deadline.
Yeah,
if I don't have that pressure, I can't get it done.
Oh yeah. I tell Danielle I thrive in the crunch. Like some of the best homework I ever did in school or papers or whatever I ever wrote was like 11:30 at night when it's due at midnight.
100%. That's probably why the preaching thing feels like such a grind to me, because I'm not real productive until there's pressure. Yeah. As a creative-ish person, and so. It's like I try on Monday and Tuesday, but let's be real. That thing's getting written on Friday, Saturday. I'm going to be up at 5 on Sunday changing it. Yeah. Changing it between services. That's just, it's a blessing and a curse having that type of brain, you know. Lots of ideas. Right. But grateful for my wife that can actually check things off of a list for sure.
That's how Danielle is for me. I'm the ambitious one, and she's the one who's like, all right, if we're gonna do this, like it's gonna take this, this, and this. And then after she breaks it all down, I'm like, well, maybe we won't do that. Maybe that's too much, So.
Yeah. In our office, we talk a lot about people that are whiteboard people and people that are checklist people. And I'm not a checklist person. It feels suffocating, but I'm a dry erase board guy. Whiteboard guy. So, and it feels done, right? you dream it up, write it down. You're like, we're done. You're like, we haven't done anything yet. But I'm like, oh, my part's done. I've already thought of it. It feels done. So
I think I read something the other day that for people who are like what we're talking about, ambitious and creative and all that, you get the same dopamine response from doing the planning as you do actually doing it. So in a lot of ways, you've gotten the reward just from like coming up with the idea, and you're like, I did it. And it's like, well, you haven't really done anything yet.
And not the same dopamine from finishing it. That feels daunting,
Right.
You feel proud of yourself when you actually do finish, but it's harder to do that. It's easier to move on to the next idea.
Yeah.
And that's fun. It's fun to see, like, in a church setting or in a business setting, like, just see how different people's gifts kind of work together. You know, it takes all of us. And so, man, I couldn't, like, our team is so strong in my weaknesses.
Yeah.
It'd be a disaster. Bluff First would be a disaster if it was just based on my strengths.
Right.
We might have a couple of cool things, but we have a big barbecue, or whatever, social. But we would struggle in a lot of areas if it wasn't for all that, tenacity and discipline that comes from different minded folks. So,
yeah, that's awesome. But you talk about like challenges and how different people could fill those roles. When you look back at your ministry, is there like a specific moment or like a specific challenge that you look back as like, that was probably the hardest thing in my time in ministry that I had to either deal with or learn to deal with or overcome?
That's a great question. I would say, sorry, I would say probably the hardest thing in ministry, because again, it's a people business, right? Yeah. The hardest thing that I've ever experienced, at least, would just be the weight of losing people, and losing people looks different, right? Like, we had a guy in our church, just radically saved, was selling drugs, met Jesus, turned his whole life around, brought everybody to church, was just on fire for God. And at 38 years old, just had a heart attack and was gone. Okay. And so, you get close to people, you love them, and then they're gone. And that's hard. Yeah. But then there's other people, they just, life takes them, they move. Yeah. And you're like, oh, they've been a part of this community, and now they're just gone. Or, people, loss of relationships, I've been a pastor 8 or 9 years now, lead pastor, and I haven't handled every situation perfectly. Yeah. I didn't navigate COVID perfectly. I didn't, and so through all of that, there's people that you let down. Right. There's people that you disappoint. There's people that you didn't check up on enough. And for whatever reason, there could be, loss of, trust or loss of relationship. And I think those are always the hardest and the heaviest to me. It's a good reminder that not everything hangs on me, and there's grace and Jesus holds everything together. But the truth is, I want everyone to stay together. Yeah. I want no one to move, no one to die, no one to hate me, no one to be disappointed in me, And there's that people pleasing part of you that just wants everyone to love you and everyone to judge you by your intentions and not your actions. It's like, I love you. Well, you haven't checked on me in 6 months. Like, but not because I don't love you. I'm just distracted and dumb, and busy. I get that. But yeah, I would say the hardest thing in ministry is just carrying the grief that can come from some of that. But next Sunday's still coming. Right. There's not a lot of opportunity afforded for a pastor to sit with that stuff. Yeah. You're on to the next sermon, and then you might be doing a wedding one day and it's a big celebration, and the next day you're doing a funeral for a child. Right. And it's like, how do you process? So I just think grief overall is a hard thing. It can make you feel lonely as do people and I know, like, I've had it easy compared to lots of people, but the enemy would have you believe nobody gets it, nobody understands, what it's like to be a pastor, what it's like to deal with all that stuff. And I know it's not true, but that would be for me, just losing people, losing relationships. That's always hard. There's hard things about the job, right? But really, the job's about people, and so losing people is always painful. You know?
Yeah, man. No, I mean, it makes sense to me.
And you even lose them for great reasons, like they're going to plant a church. You know,
Right.
Like our former executive pastors went and planted a church in their hometown. They're doing incredible work. So proud of them. I miss them. You know, I'm like, you're supposed to stay here forever.
Yeah.
But obviously God's in it, and we're proud of them, excited for them. But it's just always hard to let people that you love go.
And I think it's almost, when it's something positive, it's almost a little more bittersweet, because it's like, when, if somebody dies, like, unfortunately, or, they get upset and they leave, it's like, at least in those moments, there's kind of something you can be like mad at or upset at, but if somebody leaves and it's like sweet and positive, it's almost just kind of like, I want to be upset, but I can't,
Nobody to blame but
right.
the Lord.
The Lord.
Yeah, and his sovereignty.
Yeah. So, no, that's a good one.
It's just never easy, no matter how it is, right? It's just never easy. You love people, and they're not always going to be with you,
Right.
And so, and I've seen that happen, where just people that join the church when the church was small, and then the church gets bigger,
right,
and they're less comfortable,
right,
and they're feel less seen or whatever, and they leave, and it's like, man, that's hard. That hurts.
That is hard.
But I try to just let people go with open hands, and I've been doing it long enough now to see some people leave and come back.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, I'm glad I didn't burn a bridge there. I'm glad I didn't,
right,
voice any frustration and just let that stuff happen. Now they're back, so life is kind of this parade, of people that are moving past you, and just try to love the ones in front of you is what I try to do.
That's a good point.
But it's difficult.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah. I've lived, not that I'm old by any means, but I've lived long enough now to know that, like, I think when you're a kid and you kind of watch like the movies and stuff, life seems so like either amazing or it's sad, and it's like this free flowing state from just like, the person in the movie always starts off fine, and then they, the middle act, they get, in the trenches, and then
very black
end,
and white, one or the other.
Yeah. And then as life has gone on, like I've realized that very rarely is it ever, like like you were saying with the wedding and the funeral, it's like, you knew when you were doing that wedding, you had the funeral 2 days later, right?
Yeah.
You knew. So like in your mind, you're joyous and you're happy, but you also know that like this really grief stricken, so it's like, it's never just one or the other. It's
it's always
balance.
kind of a mixture. Yeah. I have a pastor friend named Bob. He preached a great sermon at my church, and he was looking at the book of Acts. I think it's the end of like Acts chapter 8. There's just like revival breaking out. All this incredible stuff is happening. Philip and the Ethiopian, all this stuff is happening. And then you turn the page to chapter 9, and the first verse, it says, meanwhile, Saul was ravaging the church.
Yeah.
He's killing people. He's throwing people in prison, like right in the middle of this incredible move of God. Meanwhile, all this persecution is happening. And, he made the point that it's always that way. It's always meanwhile. Things are going great at work, but you're struggling at home. Things are going great with your kids, but your grandparents aren't healthy right now.
Right.
There's just always great things happening. That's like obvious evidence of just the grace of God and the blessing of God. And then there's really hard stuff happening, bad stuff happening.
Right.
And in a church, right, you got people that you're like, oh, you got the job, or you're finally pregnant, or, and then you got people that lost the job and had a miscarriage.
Right.
And so, choosing kind of which side of that meanwhile to live on or to pull from, it's reality. It's all happening all the time. But it's kind of like the glass half full glass. Am I going to focus on what's not going well, or am I going to focus on what's going well and, deal with the other? So, but yeah, it's kind of always meanwhile,
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess one, and we can call it the final question, but like, I think one question I would love to hear is like, whether it's ministry or just life related at all. Like if you were talking to, how old did you say you were now?
I'm 38.
38. So if you were talking to 18-year-old TJ, whether it's, like I said, whether it's ministry or just life in general, like what's one thing that like looking back, you wish you would have known ahead of time, or like you would have realized back then that would have, helped you out today?
Yeah. Your metabolism is going to slow down.
Hey, that reminds me. One of my questions I was supposed to ask you was how many times last year you ate at Casa, and I don't know if you figured that number out. It's probably too many.
I played the fifth on that one. Shout out to Casa Grande, chips and salsa.
Sponsoring.
That's probably what I tell my 18-year-old self, like eat less chips and salsa.
Yeah.
No. You know, I think if I could go back and talk to that version of myself about ministry, at least, there's all kinds of things I might say personally. But about ministry, I think I would just say, have the hard conversations faster.
Yeah.
I think at 38, I do a decent job of this. But people pleasing, fear, you kind of, sometimes you have something you should address and you are playing through the worst case scenarios in your mind, or you're assuming it's going to take care of itself. They'll snap out of it. So often when I drum up the courage to have the hard conversation, it goes better than I think. And I think, I wish I would have done that a month ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. And sometimes the hard conversation is, telling somebody you're sorry. Sometimes it's confronting them, and I think the Bible gives us some ways to do that, but maybe not even the hard conversation, maybe just the hard thing. Do the harder thing. I don't know if you're like an Enneagram guy. I'm an Enneagram 7, so I'm a fun lover, and pain is the worst thing in the world. And I just avoid difficulty. I'll try to be smarter than difficulty. I'll try to outsmart it, out-create, be creative and out-invent it. And so often, if I just do the hard thing, future me is going to be so happy I did that and just got it over with. Whether it's like, I need to go get this task finished before my deadline, or I need to have that hard conversation. I notice something, I see something, I need to say something before it grows into something else. I think a lot of times I just choose the more comfortable path, and I would tell younger me, like, don't be a jerk, don't be confrontational, and don't beat yourself up, but do the hard thing faster.
Yeah.
And that leaves so much room. You spend so much time worrying about the hard thing. It's like, I spent hours and hours and hours having fake conversations with this person.
Right.
Just have the conversation. And that'd probably be, that's my knee-jerk reaction. Anyway.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I haven't thought about that.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
And I think that, honestly, if you ask me, I think I would say something similar. And I think for me, I think for a lot of people, they could come to the same conclusion for different reasons. But I think for me, it comes down to just being able to be truthful with myself of like, like you said, future you almost always benefits from past you doing the hard thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same is true, like just being honest with yourself of, you took that job you didn't like, don't suffer through that and be somewhere you don't want to be, right? Or you joined that club or that thing, you did the thing you didn't like, and now because you're there, like, don't put yourself through that. Like, just be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
Do the hard thing, because in that case, the hard thing is leaving that job or doing that different thing. And for me, that was something I had to figure out, like, later on in life, like, whether it's with your spouse or with your friends or with yourself, like, just be honest, like, realize that, like, the inner you, like, your gut is probably telling you the right thing. Even if it seems hard, just do it. Like, it's going to pay off.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. Well, this might not make the cut, but, sometimes you answer a question and you think back and you're like, oh, I should have said this. You talked about Bluff First and it's growing. Why is it growing? I would be the worst pastor on the planet if I did not mention the best team in the world.
Yeah.
For the 90s basketball people, I feel like Judd Bushler on the 98 Bulls. Like, I feel like I'm just here, but I'm surrounded by such a great staff, board. We call them the dream team, but the volunteers at our church. Dude, I am seriously, I'm so lucky. I cannot imagine. I mean, I'm so excited to go to work every day.
Yeah.
These are people you don't always look at your coworkers and think, I'd go on vacation with them. Yeah. I would be friends with it. And yet that's what I'm getting to do.
That's awesome.
And the church family, So shout out to our team.
Hey, if you want to make some specific shout outs, we can
Oh,
cut
I'm
their
not.
pictures
There's
in.
no way I'm naming them. There's no way I'm naming them. I will leave someone out. I mentioned my wife. I will mention her.
That's fair.
But man, I mean, the pastors we have,
Yeah.
the assistants we have, the staff, I mean, just again, our board, our team leads. God has done an awesome thing, and we're really lucky to be a part of it. So
That's awesome, man. Do you have any like events or anything coming up at the church you want to plug? Maybe
great
for like the
question.
month of February or March that's coming up?
yeah, great question. You're gonna cut out all this thinking, right?
Maybe. Or, I mean, if you've got like a line of soap you're making in your house and you want to plug like whatever, it's fine.
Okay. Plugs. I got you. So in February,
Okay.
we're going to be starting a series called Try This at Home. And we're looking at Ephesians chapter 5 and 6 and some pretty dicey passages. You know, the word submit is in there. A lot of people don't know what that means, have a wrong idea about what that means. For husbands and wives submitting to each other, children and parents. There's stuff in there about slaves and master, you know. So we're going to be diving into that, and that's going to be very interesting. And so great time for people to come check it out. And then right after that, so at the end of February, early March, we're doing a series that we've done a couple times at different ways called 40 Days with Jesus. And so we just invite people to just come and open the Word and spend 40 days in the Gospels in some way. This year, we're doing 7 different times in the book of John. Jesus says, I am something, you know, I am the door, I am the shepherd, whatever. And so we're going to be doing that. So, you know, this is the time of year, other than small groups and youth group and all those types of things, we don't have like a big event happening. Her night is a big thing we do in the fall. But right now, just our teaching and our series, that's probably what's coming up that I think people might be interested in. And then before you know it, it's Easter. So
yeah, I was going to say for sure Easter, if you don't have a church to go to, I assume Bluff First will be welcoming with open arms.
We will make room for you.
Awesome.
Absolutely. We will make room for you. We'll probably have some Saturday and Sunday services Easter weekend. So we'd love to see people. You can cut this out, but another shameless plug.
Yeah.
Pat Lincioni developed a resource, I think about 2020, called The Working Genius.
Okay.
It's an assessment, but it's like an assessment. It's a step-by-step process to get work done, but it puts people in those steps on like which of these steps are going to energize this person or frustrate this person.
Gotcha.
It has revolutionized our team, our staff, our meetings. It's been hugely valuable. I'm just telling you that because you're in business, so that doesn't have to make the podcast. But
I'll check that out.
It's really fascinating. And for us, it's like, man, I thought that I was lazy, or I thought that person wasn't creative. It's like, no, they're just, you need to put them, and that's helped us, right? Because we'd have a meeting, and we have the checklist people and the whiteboard people in the same room at the same time, and there's tension because I'm still throwing stuff up there, dreaming, and people are like, well, we got to get this done, and we got to, you know. So it's helped us kind of figure out, okay, who do we want at the dreaming stage?
Yeah.
Who do we want at the execution stage? And it's helped us not be so siloed, but really more play into our strengths, you know. Silly example, but I have like high invention, low tenacity. That's 2 of the words they use. Well, because of the creativity of the invention, I wind up with all the t-shirt stuff.
Yeah.
But then they're always like, hey, we need 3 more medium baptism shirts. And you got to ask me for 3 weeks to get me to reorder. But I'm the shirt guy, so I get it. And so after Working Genius, we're like, hey, hold on. When you need a new design, you can ask Pastor TJ. But when you just need some reordered, ask Pastor Josh, because he checks stuff off and he gets it done.
Yeah.
And so it's helped us like reposition our work to do what we're good at. And we got to do things we're not good at.
Yeah.
Like writing sermons takes all of the steps, you know.
Yeah.
But it's helped us play to our strengths. So
yeah, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate having you on.
Yeah.
Definitely have to do it again sometime. But again, be sure if you guys don't have anywhere to go on Easter, be sure to visit Bluff First, or and certainly if they have any questions about you guys, they can find you on social and all that. But awesome, man. Well, I appreciate having you. And,
yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Excited for your podcast.
Yeah,
Excited
for
to see
sure.
how it goes, and excited to get in here, be one of the early guests.
You
So
are.
thanks for the coffee.
Yeah,
Thanks
no
for the
problem.
time. Shout out Midway.
The Midway,
Coffee.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So awesome.